A big focus, Benjamin Netanyahu has said Israel will not stop its attacks on Hezbollah in Lebanon, despite calls from the United States, France and other allies for an immediate 3-week ceasefire. The Israeli Prime Minister told reporters that his government policy was actually clear, and he landed in New York, where he was saying that they're going to continue to strike Hezbollah with full force, and they will not stop until they reach their goals. Lebanon's Minister for Foreign Affairs, meanwhile, has said his country is enduring a crisis that threatens its very existence. Speaking at the UN General Assembly, he has said that his government welcomed yesterday's ceasefire plan by the US and France and demanded it be implemented. The leader of Yemen's Houthi rebels, meanwhile, said in a televised address earlier yesterday that the Iran-backed group will not hesitate to support Lebanon and Hezbollah as cross-border fire between the Lebanese group and Israel intensified. Meanwhile, US officials hope to persuade Mr. Netanyahu to accept the ceasefire proposal by the time he actually addresses the UN General Assembly.
דברים אחרים, מסוכם. המדיניות שלי, המדיניות שלנו היא ברורה. אנחנו ממשיכים לעשות את ההפעלה בכל הכוח. ואנחנו לא נפסיק עד שנשיג את כל יעדינו, ובראשם החזרת תושבי הצפון לבטחה לבתיהם.
My colleague Mohammed Ghazali has been tracking the finer details for us. He joins us live at the moment. Ghazali, concerning times to say the least. But at this point, is a ground invasion in Lebanon by Israel imminent? What are Israeli authorities saying?
Oh, yes, it looks very likely that perhaps Israel will take its chances to get into Lebanon. Why? Because Hezbollah appears to be at its weakest point, with many of its commanders, top commanders, have got injured in that pager blast and then explosion in the walkie-talkie, and then these aerial strikes. And some of these strikes have been a precision strikes by Israel, which has killed their top commanders, some of them who are responsible for managing drones, missiles, rockets. So certainly, Israel is not leaving its chances right now. And even Hezbollah, despite having suffered losses of its own men during these explosions and aerial strikes in the last 1 week, continues to fire rockets towards Israel. And this is where the West is very concerned, because last time when Israel got into Lebanon, the results were not very favorable for either side, whether it was Hezbollah or Lebanon or Israeli army, Israeli defense system. But now, why it is very concerning right now, because Israel has clearly said that its own goal is to get its residents back in the northern area, which they have left, fearing the rocket attack from Hezbollah. And Hezbollah had given a challenge or accepted the challenge, saying that we will not allow Netanyahu to fulfill its own demands of getting people to the northern border. Now, just last night, even Houthis from Yemen attacked. They also launched rockets towards Israel, but Israel's aerial defense system managed to intercept it. But that's not the story. The story is that even today, Mr. Netanyahu is expected to address UNGA. Meanwhile, hectic negotiations are going on. Netanyahu has already said that he's not going to accept it. So it looks very likely that this escalation, which nobody is calling it a war, but it formally is a kind of war. We are not getting into the terminology right now here, but it is going to escalate and it is going to continue for some days.
Ghazali, thanks so much for joining us with the latest update. We will, of course, revert to you for regular updates. But joining us from Beirut, Lebanon at the moment, Chari Abdel Sather, journalist from Lebanon. Thanks so much for making time for us on the World 24/7. Lebanon's Minister for Foreign Affairs has said that Lebanon is enduring a crisis that threatens its very existence. What is your initial assessment of what's unfolding since Netanyahu has refused to accept any ceasefire? Do you think a diplomatic solution is still viable?
Yes, in fact, Israel is escalating now, and Netanyahu mainly want to escalate the war because mainly the Israeli population and the polls shows that they want to come back and return to their homes in the north, and they want war with Hezbollah. They don't want a Hezbollah, a military militia on the border with Israel. That's from the Israeli side. From the Lebanese side, Hezbollah is very related to the Iran So it's decision makers in Tehran. So Iran knows well that a full-scale war with Hezbollah, with Israel, cannot be won. Okay, so the Israeli are escalating, and the Hezbollah is now like refraining. But at the same time, the tension is growing on Hezbollah, and the pressure from its population, the people that backs him in Lebanon, that they back him, that they want him to do something, because what happened was a huge blow to Hezbollah. You know that 4,000 or 5,000 of the top militants of Hezbollah are like out of action now because of the pagers explosions. So
Right.
we have like thousands of people maimed. We have hundreds of top commanders out of action, permanently out of action. So Hezbollah is now like taking a big blow and
Yeah.
is not retaliating, and this put pressure on him.
Well, Israel's army chief has worryingly said that Lebanon strikes are preparing for a ground offensive. In fact, this is the plainest indication yet from a senior figure that a ground invasion into Lebanon may be imminent. But thanks so much for joining us on NDTV. Well, in other crucial news, Japan dispatched a battleship to the sensitive Taiwan Strait for the first time on Wednesday to convey a message to China. The move by Japan to assert its freedom of navigation came on the same day that China had said it had successfully test-fired an intercontinental ballistic missile into the Pacific Ocean. The Chinese military was on high alert on Thursday, and China said it had lodged a complaint with Japan. Well, we have with us Adil Bral joining us live from Taiwan Plus. Thanks so much, Adil, for making time for us. At this point, it's hard to not acknowledge, in fact, that these transits are highly political, but some argue that they are designed to show China that America and its allies do not accept Beijing's claims. Adil, take us through the series of latest developments and also the reactions in Taipei.
Indeed, Parmeshwar, the transit of the Japanese naval vessel JS Sazanami is quite unprecedented. It's the first transit of a Japanese naval ship through the Taiwan Strait. And this has come as China has indeed increased its transits through the Japanese naval waters. The Chinese vessels were in the Japanese naval waters on 3 different occasions in the last month. And we've seen that the Japanese are responding to what China has been doing. China breached the Japanese waters around Okinawa Island, around Senkakus. And Japan is indeed responding so that China does not push the ballot further. And Japan, along with Australia and New Zealand, transited through the Taiwan Strait as the Chinese fired the ICBM. So these countries are collectively responding to China's coercive activities in the Taiwan Strait as well as South China Sea. The breaching of the Japanese naval space as well as airspace is not something that's common. We've seen that China breached the Japanese naval space for the first time. This was around the contiguous waters around the Okinawa Islands, and Japan's own transit is merely responding to what China is doing.
Yeah. Well, Adil, thanks so much for joining us with the latest from Taiwan. We will, of course, revert to you for regular updates regarding the latest developments. Meanwhile, the Chinese Defense Ministry announced that China and India have made strides in reducing differences and building some consensus regarding the disengagement of troops from friction points in eastern Ladakh. It said both nations have agreed to maintain dialogue to achieve a resolution acceptable to both sides at an early date. The big question, is momentum building up towards a resolution of the boundary dispute in Ladakh? Well, let's turn our attention now to the United Kingdom, where the public Wi-Fi networks across 19 railway stations managed by the UK's Network Rail have been hacked and remain inaccessible as British Transport Police investigate this cyber attack. Network Rail has said that a number of London stations, including London Euston and Paddington, and Manchester Piccadilly, Liverpool Lime Street, Birmingham New Street, Edinburgh Waverley, and Glasgow Central were among those targeted. And passengers trying to log on to public Wi-Fi and the Network Railway managed stations were hit with a screen with a message about terror attacks in Europe. Telent, the company that manages this Wi-Fi system, said the attack was first reported on Wednesday evening and it came from someone running the Wi-Fi homepage, and the matter is now being dealt with by the police there. Well, meanwhile, Pakistan is bracing for transitional pain as the IMF has approved a $7 billion loan. Pakistan said it would have to go through some transitional pain after the International Monetary Fund agreed to a new relief package of $7 billion to bolster its faltering economy. Although Pakistan's economy has stabilized since it came close to defaulting last summer, it is dependent on the IMF bailouts and loans from friendly countries to service its huge debt, which swallows up half of its annual revenues. There will be transitional pain, but if they are to make it the last program, then they have to carry out these structural reforms. This is what the Minister of Finance in Pakistan has told local media. The IMF said in a statement it would issue an immediate disbursement of around $1 billion. Meanwhile, quick update from Japan, where the ruling party will select its next prime minister. The process is usually a predictable ritual decided by old men in back rooms. But this contest to replace outgoing leader Fumio Kishida is marked by excitement, diversity, and many say unpredictability. The top three candidates are moderate Shinjiro Koizumi, a former prime minister's son, who at 43 would be Japan's youngest post-war leader; Sanae Takaichi, a nationalist who would infuriate China and who could be Japan's first female leader; and populist frontrunner Shigeru Ishiba, who has called for an Asian NATO. Whichever Liberal Democratic Party member wins will face big tests at home and, of course, abroad amid tense relations with China and a new US president. Meanwhile, in a major boost to India's efforts to secure a permanent seat in the United Nations Security Council, French President Emmanuel Macron has supported India's bid for a permanent membership of a reformed United Nations Security Council, while also advocating the expansion of the powerful UN body. In fact, to quote him, he said, "We have a Security Council that is blocked. Let's make the UN more efficient. We have to make it more representative." This is what Macron said at the United Nations General Assembly in New York. In fact, he added, France is in favor of the Security Council being expanded. Germany, Japan, India and Brazil should be permanent members, as well as two countries that Africa will decide to represent it. Well, news and updates continue in a moment right after this very short break. Don't go anywhere. Well, former US President Donald Trump is set to meet with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky today at the Trump Tower in New York. This follows the meeting scheduled with British Prime Minister Keir Starmer last night, and the meetings coincide with the visit of both the leaders to the United States for the United Nations General Assembly.
As you know, President Zelensky is asked to meet with me, and I will be meeting with him tomorrow morning at around 9:45 in Trump Tower. And it's a shame what's happening in Ukraine. So many deaths, so much destruction. It's a horrible thing. And one of the things that are very bothersome to me is the fact that Europe is paying only a small fraction of the money that the United States of America is paying. And we have an ocean between Russia and ourselves. They don't.
Well, it's been an action-packed touchdown for the Ukrainian president while he's been in the US. He also met with the President Joe Biden and Democratic presidential candidate Kamala Harris as the Ukrainian leaders sought to shore up more support ahead of the United States election in November. The series of Washington meetings came as Zelensky has called for more US military aid to his embattled country, regardless of who wins the upcoming vote in November. My colleague Caroline Malone joins us from Washington with the key takeaways.
hours of talks with US lawmakers. President Joe Biden, Vice President and Democratic candidate for president Kamala Harris, and news that Donald Trump, the Republican candidate for president, will also talk to Volodymyr Zelensky on Friday. Well, following the UN's General Assembly in New York, it's been a whirlwind of meetings for the Ukrainian leader in the US capital. Even though he's visited the White House multiple times in recent years, this trip may be the most significant if it's the last one under the Biden administration and a potentially less supportive government takes over. Washington announced what officials characterized as a surge in assistance, $8 billion of military aid to use up as much approved funding for Kyiv as possible before the end of Biden's term, and a medium-range precision-guided bomb, a massive missile upgrade for Ukraine's stash. Well, Harris pledged continued support for Ukraine. She said anyone, alluding to Trump, who wants Ukraine to give up territory to Russia is asking them to surrender to Vladimir Putin. Well, White House officials said one of Biden's priorities is to make sure Ukraine is set up for its long-term security and on a path to NATO membership with a more robust defence manufacturing industry of its own. Biden and Zelensky are planning to meet again soon, but next time it'll be on European soil in Germany on October 12th. Caroline Malone for NDTV, Washington.
Meanwhile, a powerful hurricane was barreling towards Florida, with officials warning of unsurvivable conditions and a potentially catastrophic storm surge high enough to swamp a two-story house. Tens of thousands of people were without power and roads were already flooded ahead of what is expected to be one of the largest Gulf of Mexico storms in decades. Thank you for investing your time and watching this edition of The World 24/7. We'll keep tracking the latest developments for you. Do stay tuned.